Hey everyone, my name is Ashley and welcome back to my home. Today I'm doing a totally new experiment. I have never made homemade vinegar before and I'm really excited to try. While I use vinegar when I do canning, that's not the kind of vinegar that I'm making. Vinegar that you use for canning you should really buy from a store because it has been diluted to a 5% acidity, which is what you want and which all the recipes that call for vinegar in canning count on. So this is for all the homemade uses that I use for anything non-canning related, which is going to be things like homemade broths. I put a little vinegar in there as an acid that comes out easier with that additional ingredient. I also use vinegar when I'm making homemade dressings and marinades. Those are the top 3 reasons why I use vinegar in my house. So I actually have 1 pear and 2 apples that are showing a little bit of signs that they need to be used. And I was originally thinking about using a scrap recipe where you use just like the peels of fruit, but I found some advice recommending against that because it can lead to more sediment in your vinegar. So I was thinking, let me start with these fruits that look like they're maybe not going to be the best quality for eating, but still in really good shape. I'll cut off any parts that look like they're undesirable and start with that. Again, this is a totally new thing. It's an experiment. This is also something that takes several weeks to make. So today is my starting day. It's mid-February. So I would expect this to be done maybe around the end of March, if not a little sooner, depending on how quickly it turns into vinegar. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead and get my fruit washed up. Whenever I'm washing my fruit, I like to rinse it under warm water. I feel like that is what helps to get the waxes and things off if it is a store-bought fruit. Ideally, this would be coming from our apple trees. However, we devoured all the apples that came off of the tree that produced this year. Got them all washed up and ready to go. So I'm just going to chop these up. Now my jar is already getting half full. I'm gonna go ahead and get my pear cut up. I only want my jar to be about 3/4 the way full. If for some reason the pear does it, which I'm thinking it will, we'll just eat the rest of this apple. Okay, just like I thought, this did get to where I want to stop filling. So we'll eat the rest of that apple fresh. 3/4 the way full with these fruit chunks. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of Bragg's apple cider vinegar. And the reason I'm using that apple cider vinegar is because it has the natural sediment, the natural, I guess, mother that they call it, in the vinegar. So it'll give this fruit all of the good bacteria that it needs to get fermenting on its own. And then I'll fill the rest with water, cover it with a cloth and ring, and then let it do its thing. Now, some recipes also call for sugar to help get the fermentation jump started, but I'm going to omit that and just have complete faith in the Bragg's and the fruit. The other thing is the water that you add. You want to make sure that it's filtered or not chlorinated in some way. That added chemicals to the water can interfere with fermentation process. Okay, we're just checking on the vinegar. There's not a whole lot of bubble activity. I wanted to also point out that I trained out my regular mouth quart jar for my wide mouth quart jar. Whenever I ferment pickles in the summer with my cucumbers, I use a 1/2 gallon jar, which has a wide mouth. And then I bring all the liquid and pickles or the cucumbers up to where I can set a little 1/4 pint jar right inside, and it pushes it down just enough leaves a little bit of space so nothing bubbles over. And the regular mouth quart jar was not working for this vinegar, so I thought I'm gonna do my old standby. So I just go in there every day. This is day 3. I've been going in actually multiple times a day, just kind of peeking at it and whatnot. And it's getting a lot thicker, a lot murkier. The pears are starting to disintegrate a little bit, similar to, I'm guessing, how a scrap vinegar would work. But things are looking pretty good. There's no mold growth or anything, which I think is because of my double jar in there. But we'll just keep going on it and keep checking on it. So today is day 4 of the pear apple cider vinegar. And I noticed something happening this morning. All these bubbles are starting to accumulate on the edge. And I think that's because these are bubbles trying to make their way up and out. Now, I think part of why I was thinking this wasn't bubbling like a lot of my ferments normally bubble is because I don't have a cap on at all. It's just the cloth, so all the bubbles can just go up. And if you look, every once in a while, you can see one travel upward. So it may be just taking a little bit longer for me to see the bubble action, but it's definitely happening. And it was interesting because last night after I stirred this around, I was thinking maybe I should add some sugar. Everything I read said that the bubbles will start in a lot sooner than they have. But here this morning, they're really building up and it's starting to make some movement. Okay, we checked on the vinegar earlier, but then later when I looked at it, I noticed that it was wet and all of this scum kind of had pushed up. I think all that bubble activity that we saw earlier is what's been pushing the inside jar up. That tends to happen when I pickle my cucumbers as well. The main difference is that when I'm fermenting pickles, I do have a lid on here, so it keeps this little jar from pushing up and out of this main jar. And you can see all those bubbles coming up. So I'm just gonna push all this down. Oh yeah, that's so much more activity than just from earlier even. Wow. I'm just gonna try to get all that foamy stuff down in there too. I will do a really good strain and filter job to get out all of the pulp and try to get the sediment once all the chunks come out. So I'm going to wash this little jar so that it comes back in here nice and clean. And I'm also going to wash this. When I ferment my pickles, the amount of time where you have all those bubbles really, really active and more or less pushing upward, it doesn't usually last that long, a few days, I would say at the most. So I'm hoping it's going to be the same with this. I went ahead and washed this inner jar. I got a clean, dry piece of cloth here, and I washed the other one by hand, so it'll be ready. If this one gets wet, it'll be ready to rotate in. And we'll just get that secured on and let it keep working. Earlier, when I noticed that it was overflowing a little bit, I went ahead and put this bowl underneath to catch any liquids that might come out before I had time to deal with it. And I also do this with my half-gallon jars. I have a larger size of this very bowl. And any jars that I have going, if they're in that active fermentation stage, I'll put a bowl under just to capture any juices. You don't want to go to wherever they are and just find all these juices spilling all around it. It can be quite a mess. Okay, good morning. Today is day 6 on the apple cider pear vinegar, and we still have had a lot of bubble activities. You can see this has been coming up some more. I'm really glad that I washed this cloth yesterday and I got a new ring because I know some of the liquids have been getting on the ring. I got a clean jar, so we'll go ahead and just get this switched out, push everything down, and let it go until tomorrow. You know what? I'm actually going to transfer this over to another jar. This juice has been down in here, so I know it's been getting on the jar. I'm just going to switch it out and clean this quick. If you've made homemade vinegar before, will you let me know if you've had this smell a lot like alcohol? It almost smells like kombucha, which I really don't like. And I I'm assuming that through this process, all of those alcohols get eaten up or somehow consumed by the bacteria, but I'm not really sure. Yesterday, after I checked the vinegar, we still had some pushing up of this jar. And so this got a little bit wet early in the day, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace this again. However, as the day went on, this didn't push up like it's been doing. So I think that part of this process is probably winding down. It's still very active. There's still lots of bubbles. There's still lots of bubbles and lots of activity, but it's just not quite as vigorous and pushing up that inside jar. And so today is day 7. And this is just looking really, really good. I'm going to replace the jar, the ring, and the fabric again, because I think that, like I've said, as this gets wet from the vinegar, it's just good to replace that every day. And I think I'll leave this jar one more day. I'll wash it tomorrow, but I am going to change out the bowl underneath because there's a little bit of liquid down there. Today is day 8 and the first day that our cloth on top has been dry since the really active fermenting began. Because of this, we are going to do a complete clean out of all of the supplies. I am also not going to put it in a bowl anymore because it shouldn't overflow from this point on. I will see you back when this is ready to separate the liquids from the fruit solids. Today is a busy day around here. So before I get started on anything, I wanted to go ahead and sift my vinegar out from the solids. And we had some technical difficulties with the recording of that. And I'm hoping that's not an indicator of how today goes, but if it is, it is. And so what I did was I sifted out the big pieces from the vinegar and I put it in. I just used a sieve and I was able to get the chunks out. And the amount of vinegar that was left was about 1.5 cups. And so this was 3/4 the way full with chunks, if you remember, and then covered with water, which resulted in about 1.5 cups of vinegar. So I'm thinking, I'll think about that going forward when I determine how much vinegar I want to make. One of the things that I mentioned that got lost in the technical difficulty was that over the last week, this has started to take on a vinegar smell, moving away from just that alcohol smell, which is what I was hoping for. I hadn't detected any of that vinegar yet, but I'm starting to detect a vinegar smell to it. Today marks 3 weeks exactly since we started this project. And so at this point, I'm going to transfer it into a smaller jar. If it was more than 2 cups, I would just keep it in this jar, but because it's less, I'll put it in a pint jar and it'll fit great. And then it will sit for at least another 3 weeks, I'm thinking, until it gets to where you want it. And after you have sifted this out and you're just letting it sit with just the liquid, you keep it out fermenting on the counter, again, covered with that cloth. You pretty much just keep it going until you feel like it's done. Okay, so when I was straining this out, I'm just using the cloth that I used to cover the jar. And about half of it came out really easily, and then we hit the stuff that was a lot thicker. And you can see that it's kind of on this part. This is the line where it was sort of clogging the fabric. But I'm just trying to get out any last little chunks. I'm okay if it's a thick kind of murkiness. I think that's what you want anyway. See, this stuff came out from the inside. And this is just pulp. That's not any of the bacteria. The bacteria is going to be in that liquid. The stuff that we want to continue this vinegar process is already very much so in that liquid. So I think next time, well, depending on how this tastes, if it's like crazy good when we're done and we just can't get enough of that pear flavor, I would probably do pear again. But because it sort of just started breaking apart and breaking down the pear so quickly, that makes me a little hesitant to use it again. But this type of project is effectively a way to not spend any money on vinegar. If you make vinegars that you like, you can do this from literally scrap food. And it's something that would be free.
One thing that was missed in the footage that was lost that I'm kind of bummed about is when I first started getting into this vinegar and I took out that little jar that sits in, I could see that this vinegar was starting to make its very own mother, which if you're into fermenting, you know exactly what that means, and that's a pretty exciting sign. But I was kind of bummed that I couldn't show you.
Okay, there we go. And this has a measurement. How close was I to the 1.5 cups? It's more like 1.25 cups, I guess. It's kind of thick, but I put this cloth on double thickness, and I'm not sure that my ring is liking it. Can't quite grip the jar. All right, so we'll go single layer. All right, there we go. This is gonna sit until it tastes according to how we like it. If you've made homemade vinegar and have any suggestions after seeing the process that I've gone through, please leave those suggestions in the comments, because I would love to see what other people have learned from doing this. Any other vinegar flavor ideas, I would greatly appreciate that as well. I think some people put herbs in there. I'm not sure if those herbs go in during the fermentation stage or if it's sometime later. But if you enjoyed following along this process with me, I would greatly appreciate if you'd thumbs up the video. And if you want to see more of what comes out of my kitchen, please subscribe, and we will see you soon.